Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. This is our Wednesday night live show. I've got special guest tonight, Kevin Boyle, and myself and Kevin have had many conversations over many cups of tea and the occasional pint over the years about what it is that we live in. Who are we? What are we within the system? What's it all about? These are big questions, and also the questions that a lot of people don't really know enough about to answer, which is incredible when you think about it, because we live in a system which we think we know about. Now, of course, we don't know about it because we're not taught about it. So ignorance of the law is no excuse, but that's a legal maximum. So if ignorance of the law is no excuse, then we have no excuse for not educating ourselves in the principles of the system we live in. Most of the things that go wrong are due to the fact that people have no understanding of the actual system that we are living in. And we're going to be talking about that over the next few weeks. And also, I've got an awful lot of information, even on the website, windowsontheworld.net. I sent Kevin over some articles today, and I actually forgot about some of the detail in those articles. I was looking at one before the show, all about the Crown Temple. And it's absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, I don't want to throw anyone in the deep end, and I don't want to assume knowledge. There's a lot of people who listen to our shows who actually do know a lot, and they're going to go, yeah, I know this, but most people actually don't. And I think the major problem with this stuff is there's a misunderstanding about the way that it's put across and what it actually means. For instance, people go, what's legal and what's lawful? Well, legal is the letter of the law, the science of the law, but lawful is the moral of the law. In other words, if a court is acting against the public interest, then it's not actually lawful, but it is legal. And these are things that are really interesting, and they're actually concepts. They're concepts. They're actually paradoxes to a lot of people, because they're concepts. They're concepts in law, and people do not understand what these concepts mean. So we're going to be talking a bit about that over the next few weeks, and certainly a lot tonight. We're going to try and get started. And I think, Kevin, you'd like to sort of outline a few things that you've been thinking about. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, Mark. Firstly, everything seems to, even in the law, seems to begin with the concept of the divine, of God, if you like. Yeah. And there seems to be a foundational principle that must be respected within the law, that we are free, and we can only, even a system that has a bad intent, it has to be set up in such a way that the rules demand that it gets our consent for what's done to us. Because it's, in other words, it seems like that there's, if I try and put it like this, that there's some kind of pact, not a pact, but an understanding between the divine, if given that there is a divine, and whatever the authorities are on this world, which I see as Luciferian, Mark, but I don't know if you do or not. We haven't really talked about this.
Yeah, we can get into that. For the purposes of keeping it simple, let's talk about it as an administrative system. Now, the point is this. Okay, for the administrative system to work, you have to be registered into that system. You have to be registered. Your name is registered and put on a roll, and it creates an estate. Now, you own an estate. That could be your house, it can be your property, it can be your name. These are all your estate. Now, the problem that most people seem to have is that they don't understand that the state owns your estate. You can never own anything. You have a usufructuary interest in anything that you say that you own. In other words, because we are divine, you can hold property, you can hold a title to some property, you can have a car with a V5 document, you can have a house with a title deed, but you can't own the property. You can never own the property because the property is divine. So that's one way of looking at it. So if you look at it that way, then it is the system does work on divinity. If you look at it the other way, it's black magic, because what happens is when a child is registered, they're given to the state. The parents willingly registered the child. Now they have a choice, but there's a fine involved and they could get the child taken off them. So in reality, there's no choice. So in other words, Once you are registered property of the state, you adhere to the rules of that state and that society. So
but this is the consent. This is the consent
yes,
thing I was talking about, Mark. Is
yes,
that the system, which I think you do too, is run by rather wicked lot. I was going to look at that the big picture system there and that
yeah,
diagram I brought, but it's still it looks as if the system has to follow the kind of respect the divine principles. Although it's allowed to deceive you, and it's allowed to do everything to grow. Our challenge, it seems to me that, as you said, everything is black magic, and basically we're here to be challenged by these kind of virtual realities, really. Virtual reality. Every reality seems to be a virtual reality, and basically you're dealing with thought forms of one kind or another all the time. That's really what you're dealing with. That's a bit of a kind of I've kind of made that a bit too big in a way, but that's I mean, I've read your articles, and you are really talking about, when you get down to it, you can get into the practicals of it, and the practical things of it, which you've done very, very interesting, I think. But it's ultimately, when you start talking about the principles of things, you're dealing with kind of magicians in a way.
yes. It's not magic because it's concepts that people don't understand. There is an evil force that can be employed, and there's a good force that can be employed. And when I say employed, I'm using the terminology of the system, because that means that there has to be some kind of balancing of the books. So the way I look at it is this: the books have become unbalanced. Fraud is allowed and accepted within the system. When I went to Crown Court a few years ago on behalf of my friend, I knew that she was completely innocent. So when I went into the court and realized the way it was going, I knew something was wrong. Now, this is a problem. This is a major problem. And this is where balancing the books becomes very, very difficult. In actual fact, the more serious the crime is, the less easy it is to balance the books. Well, let's have a look at some examples over the years. Look at the Jill Dando murder with Barry George. It was clear from the outset. Most people knew that he didn't do it. Anyone can see that the concept of what happened to Jill Dando was that she had been professionally assassinated. And we did a gig up at Metropolitan Police Sports and Social Club, the Warren in Bexley. Just after that had happened, our drummer said to the copper, he said, "Oh, the Jill Dando thing." He said, "Yes, my friend Hamish is on that case." And he was. If you look back at it now, what happened was that policeman said she was killed by a professional assassin. It was a professional hitman who killed her. She was shot in the back of the head. Her head was held down. She was shot in the back of the head with 2 bullets. Okay.
Right.
Now, why would this poor, simple guy, who obviously had a few mental health problems, be put in the frame for that? Because it's the same thing that seems to happen all the time with these cases. And this is where I think this is the top end of where it gets quite evil. Because in order to keep the common good, in order to keep society within some kind of structure so that people aren't freaking out all over the place when the TV personalities are being murdered in the street, they need you to think that the person's been caught. And that is a huge problem, because this is totally anti-divine. This is actually the epitome of evil. People getting stitched up for things they haven't done. And you're right. When I went into that court and I saw the disingenuous barrister that we had, and I said things to her, I knew we were going to lose. And that bitch was absolutely evil. And I railed against this for a long time, and I called out a
and that was your lawyer, Mark. That was your lawyer.
Barrister. Yeah.
You're a barrister. So you're given a barrister who worked against your interests.
I believe so. And obviously she did, because I said something to her. I won't go into the case. It's actually on windowsontheworld.net, and it's called Kent Police Crime Farming. And crime farming is a good term for this, because it means that if the police go anywhere, they're trying to find as many defendants as possible, which is that's the way it works now, right? Yeah. We've gone beyond an administrative system. We've gone into a kind of industrial system for crime. In other words, create the crime and find the people who you want to blame. And that's really the big problem. And when I said these things to her chambers, I contacted them, And I asked for her legal qualifications. She made medical qualifications, because she made medical determinations which were entirely inaccurate. And you could look them up on the internet and see they were completely inaccurate. So I asked for her medical qualifications. What those corrupt, lying people who wear wigs in chambers sent back to me was the testimony of a policeman who'd openly lied, whose testimony had been withdrawn from the case because they'd lied. It was meant to be kept out of the court. And furthermore, in summing up, the judge undermined my testimony by reading out redacted stuff that should have never been put in. And all she said was, I didn't want to draw any more attention to it. I said, how much more attention could you draw to it than the judge undermining all my testimony to the jury in summing up? So that is breathtakingly scary stuff, right?
But there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can do about that. If you get basically a corrupt judge and a corrupt barrister defending yourself, I mean, you've kind of had it. In that circumstance, you've had it. I mean, mostly all you can do is work out how to use the system against itself, isn't it?
Yes.
But if you've got if you're dealing with extreme corruption, I mean, it's gangsterism, isn't it? It's something else.
Well, let's call it the common good. People don't know what the common good is. The common good is the stabilization of society. There may be certain individuals out there who the people who are in charge, the administrators, deem should not be at large, because they may destabilize the public. They may start educating them. You never know. So it's a little bit like Jesus in the temple with the moneylenders. It's the same kind of thing. The administrative system does not want that, because it can destabilize their system. Now, the other good point is this. So what's people are going to say, well, what would your system be? Which is the question. Okay, I would say that I believe in self-government. However, there's a problem there, because you can walk down the street tomorrow and a person with a mental illness can attack you, and they will be out of their minds, and therefore they are not responsible for their actions. So there's a huge problem here with liability. And that is the dichotomy with a lot of this stuff. But when we bring it down to basics, it's all about a claim being made against somebody. So you bring a claim, and has that claim got validity? And where it's all gone wrong, especially with the administrative courts, is that there is no accountability. In other words, now you've got private courts, you've got secret courts. I'm not just talking about the court of protection. I'm not just talking about things that are held in chambers. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about secret courts. In other words, you may be going to take a government body on in a county court, and you'll get into that court, and that case will not be recorded, and that you will be judged against administratively by a judge in private, and that's called privateering. So they take people's property in private by privateering. That's what land pirates do.
But it's just, Mark, hang on. It's astonishing to me that if this kind of thing happens, there isn't a recourse. I mean, you're saying that if you want to defend yourself against this, you have to kind of challenge them before it gets to that stage. Isn't that what you said? You have to challenge. You have to challenge these bailiffs.
Yeah, let's get onto that a bit later, because we're a bit too early on for that.
Okay.
Still talk about this. So I think we should talk more about the philosophical side of what's going on, because it ties in. Now, the thing is this: the administrative system works quite well. From 1296 on, lawyers were using the court of what they call admiralty, which is the law of the sea, which is the law of commerce, a commercial transaction. Therefore, because you have a birth certificate, because you were registered to the state, because you're on a roll register, and you are administratively part of the system, then the system can say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make you liable for this amount of money. Now, the money has to be put on paper, but you can't be put on paper. We can't get Kevin Boyle onto a piece of paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a fiction. So
Yeah.
you'll be represented on a piece of paper.
That's
Now,
the
if you're
capitalized name, right? All that.
yeah, or yes, the capitalized name in all black signifies death.
Right.
That's why on your birth certificate it says name of informant. That the
Right.
parent is the informant. It's not the parent. It will have your father. On mine, it's got profession of my father, you know, but it says informant, and it was him. So he informed on the state that I'd been born. He didn't have to do it, but there was a big fine involved if he didn't. And also, and now it's a really big issue because what they're doing is vaccinating children at birth. So they're basically taking all your rights off you as soon as you sign up to the system, which is what you're doing.
It's not as bad as in the States, Mark, where they automatically circumcise boys when they're born as a matter of protocol in a lot of the States. That's a dreadful thing I found out about this week. Oh my God. Anyway, sorry, talk about rights.
That's a side issue, but that's the way. That's also a way of controlling people as biological robots. Maybe we can get into that time, but we've talked about that before. But I don't think we should bring that up particularly because that's a big story now. But yes, that's a very good point because it's all about consent. And if you don't give your consent, then there's something wrong. In other words, the system is not a system anymore. It's not a system of administration. Administration means there's two parties. There's several parties involved, right? You can't go and say you've got no choice. So what do? You make it look as though you've been given the choice.
Yes.
And then you make it look as though the person has willingly signed his name over. Okay, let's go back to what you were saying about Luciferian. I'd say black magic. In black magic, the magician has to have something of the flesh and blood or something owned of the person to connect to that person, right?
Yeah.
This is how voodoo works. This is how all these primitive kinds of black magic works. Yeah. Now, so they take something of you and they therefore make you in miniature as macro, as above, so below. The universe is, basically the magician's idea is that they can somehow influence the universe. Now that is a Luciferian thing to say for a start, right? Because that implies that you're going to take control over other people.
Yeah.
And that is the definition of evil, right? To control another against their will.
Yeah.
So what the black magician does is he gets, if it's a ritual, they get people to consent by blood. So now if someone's doing magic on you, they will get an object again and link it to you. So if you've been given a name and you respond to that name at birth, and that name's written down in black capital letters, and they assume you to be dead because you were lost at sea.
That's another point. Yeah, that's
another point. But we can't. Maybe we can go into this slowly, and
I think so. I mean,
I don't think we can get into all at once because there's big misunderstandings about the whole thing. So basically, I can't get Kevin Boyle onto a piece of paper, but I want to take him to court. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a claim against the person of Kevin Boyle because you're not in the room with me at the moment, right? So I'm going to have to send it to your place of address, your name and address. So in order for service to actually happen, to make a claim, I have to send you through the post at an address where you can be found in your name a claim. I have to make a claim against you. You have to then receive that claim and respond to it. If you don't respond to that claim, then by acquiescence, you can actually lose in court. Okay? So the judgment will go against you.
It's so consent. In other words, consent. There's consent to is always assumed. In other words,
yes.
So if you haven't responded, it means that you accept the letter. Basically, that's what's assumed, isn't it? That you so you're basically admitting guilt on that. Unless so you need to respond. Basically, you need to respond.
You must respond, because if you do not respond, you are judged to be in acquiescence, which means acceptance. Okay. So you've now been incorporated into the world on a birth certificate, and I want to take you to court. So I take the birth certificate name to court, which is not you. I can't take you to court because you're a living, breathing human person. You're a man, right? Can't take you to court, but I can summon you to appear in the court. to answer my claim.
Okay.
So your legal person is being summoned to the court. I can't summon you because you're a divine human being. You belong to God, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I can't summon you. So I can summon you to appear. And that's what magicians do, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
summon
yeah.
someone to appear. Okay. So you appear in the court, and the judge is there to hear my side of the story and your side of the story. Now, if you've been competent, you've filed your response to my rebuttal to the court. So I'll say he owes me £3,500 and it's breach of contract, and you go, no, actually it wasn't breach of contract because I performed these skills that he wanted me to do. I built the extension, he just didn't like it. Okay, right? So then there's a controversy between the two parties. So the judge is then going to say, well, so you actually built the extension, but you said that you hadn't been paid for it. So basically, so there's a controversy. Now, say, no, I built the thing, but he's not happy with it. Okay, why isn't he happy with it? I think we're going to have to adjourn here. I need to get the details of the case. So what I want is who sent what, the original agreement, and has it been performed to the standards agreed? If it's not been performed to the standards agreed in the contract, then I will issue damages to the party, to me, okay? And that's how it should work. But because the system has allowed massive fraud to happen, and the first stage of this was the administrative courts using what they call the Admiralty Law. Now, the Admiralty Law was being used as far back as 1296. I've got a book called The Development of Admiralty Law, was written in the 1800s, and I read all about it. And I read the Admiralty Law Act, and it's all on my website in those articles, which anyone can find. There's an article called Are You a Pauper? Administrative Courts Are Unlawful. Just keep looking. There's loads of stuff there. And that's the thing, that people get this big idea that it's all about admiralty and stuff. Well, it's actually administration, really. But because it's easier to use these naval terminologies and to make you salvage, in other words, when you come into a court under the admiralty system, there'd be salvage. In other words, I've got a bill of lading. That's my summons to you. That's my claim to the court. So you have to go, well, is everything in the court? Is Kevin Boyle in the court? And you go, yes, he's here. And they say, okay, so we've got Kevin Boyle on board now, and you won't need to go into the dock, and you tell us, Kevin, your side of the story. And basically, that's how it works. Now, there's nothing wrong with that system, but the point is that people don't understand there's occult things that go on in courts.
And the thing that can I say, Mark, you've gone through an awful lot there. I mean, I'm slowly gathering this stuff, but there's not.
I went a bit all over the place too.
Well, no, when you go through it, it's very hard to follow it because there's just an awful lot in there. But the overall thing is that the Admiralty law and all these things do is they kind of define you in such a way as that you're an entity that's owned by the state, owned by the system, that you're tied up in all kinds of knots and kind of limitations and restrictions before you ever go near anything. For even that thing you were saying about you need lawyers to help you because you're deemed to be incompetent and all the rest of it. And these things are deliberately written into it. They're kind of encoded into the system of disabling anyone that comes before the court and making you basically ward of court, subject of court, a kind of an imbecile. You say an imbecile is the word you use. The system defines you as an imbecile who needs a lawyer to stand for you and this kind of thing. So this is kind of black magic. But can I ask you, does this Admiralty law now, as it's written, is this still used in courts today?
It's used in county courts because we're talking about salvage there. We're talking about basically money, transference of assets.
So in administrative cases in public law then?
Yes. And it is used. I mean, it's not a big conspiracy theory. And also, it's not even some occult thing. It's that the lawyers were getting very used to the Admiralty in 1200s.
It's just the way the system works.
Yeah, the lawyers of the common pleas didn't like it. The lawyers of the common pleas and the common law didn't like this because their clients were getting screwed over in the county court administratively,
Okay.
and probably not being able to put all sides of their story forward.
Right.
So what happened was that they started to object to it. But then again, the lawyers started making money out of it. So the lawyers, when they complained about it, were thinking, well, actually, this is quite a good thing, because we can bring all sorts of controversies into the court where we know the other side, where we know our client's going to lose, but we're still going to make money. And that's the problem, right? So a lawyer will keep you going, and they will say, oh, yes, well, you know, it's £150 a letter. They want to keep you away from the remedy. They don't want to get you near the remedy. They want to keep you away from it. What's the point? You know, how much law can you afford? You know, that's the point. It's sort of, that's why cases like these administrative cases of libel and all the rest of it are so complex, because what happens is the actual remedy may be very simple, but both sides complicate it because it's a theatre of a performance to the judge and the court. Well, my right honourable friend, the learned judge, my right honourable friend did not disclose this before the case. I'm asking from the adjournment. That's denied. All of the whole bundle was in the court, and we were not served it, sir. In that case, we will have a very short adjournment, and you can go through your papers, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. And this is how it goes on and on and on. You know,
it's, you make the law sound as if it's full of shysters, Mark. I mean, that's outrageous. Can I read you something I read yesterday? This is quite different, but I'm going to bring it up on the screen because you know that guy Manuel Swedenborg, right?
Yes.
Right. This fellow, he's a fellow who claimed that he was commissioned by Jesus Christ. He was a minister in the Swedish government, and he was an inventor and a scientist, all this kind of stuff. And he came to London when he was 53. He started having out-of-body experiences, and he claimed that he was commissioned by Jesus Christ to visit the heavens and the hells and the world of spirits where people are sent one place or the other. And the Times used to say what this guy was doing on a particular day. You know, he was a very big figure in his time in the mid 1700s, but he had this to say about this kind of civil matters, people who distort civil matters. I'm going to read it because it's quite funny. I found it funny anyway. It says, those that have been inwardly wicked while maintaining an outward appearance of goodness, and have thus filled up the measure of their wickedness by artifices, using goodness as a means of deceiving, these are at once cast into hell. I have seen some such cast into hell immediately after death, one the most deceitful with his head downward and feet upwards, and others in other ways. There are some immediately after death that are cast into caverns. And it goes on like this, the kind of detail of what happens. But the point is that everybody else, most of the people, even who are even going to hell, are kind of solicited to, and what's the word? That they were given some advice and say, oh, you can come back another go later or whatever. They're talked to and helped on their way. But people in public administration who use their position to screw innocent people, he cast in his writings as basically the lowest of the low, because they're using cleverness to harm others. I just thought I'd throw that in because it's quite.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, also his claim is quite interesting because anyone can make a claim. You see, a claim is not by definition something that's true. In fact, often it isn't true.
Yes.
A claim is just something that you make. And then if I make a claim in court, you have to rebut that claim. Otherwise, my claim stands. But what will generally happen is the judge will intervene as well with his learned knowledge and say, well, I don't think your claim is going to be upheld in this court, Mr. Windows. Therefore, I'm dismissing this case. I say, but I said I've been sent by Jesus, and I've been sent here, and I'm now going to administer everything in the judicial system on his behalf. He said, well, I'm not going to hear that today, Mr. Windows. And if you persist with this claim, I am going to put you into the court of protection, and I'm going to ask for 2 doctors to come down and section you under the Mental Health Act, which is probably what would happen, right? So claims are kind of interesting because everything revolves around a claim. One of the biggest claims on human property, us as property, was a papal bull Unam Sanctum of 1302. Pope Boniface. And that put everything in the world under God into trust to the Holy Roman Empire until Jesus came back. Pretty clever one, that one. So there's no salvation outside the universal church. There is no salvation outside the universal church.
I was told that at school, Mark. I was told if you're not a Catholic, you're going to hell. You're going to hell. I was told that when I was 8 years old. I didn't like it, but I was told it. Sorry, go on.
Every human creature will be subject to the Roman pontiff. Every human creature. Interesting that, isn't it? Because in the Bible, it says that we have dominion over everything that creepeth on the earth. If we're creatures, then we're those that creepeth on the earth. And we are not having dominion over the earth. It means someone else has dominion over us. So you could put that down as a pretty evil claim, you see. And a lot of these claims that the Catholic Church made were pretty evil. And the worship of bones and relics and all the rest of it and the stuff that they got up to is a form of neo-paganism and black magic. And
not all Catholics saw that as worship.
Oh no, I'm not saying. I'm saying on a cult level.
It was a racket for money. That's sure. Yeah, they were making money. They were selling blessings. They were selling indulgences, which means that time off in hell. Selling them for money. Oh my God. So it was pretty.
Yes, and then we get on to things like oaths. Taking an oath, swearing an oath on the Bible, which is what you do when you go into a crown court.
Right.
You usually swear on a copy of a King James or a Quran if you're a Muslim, or a Hindu Veda book. They have one for everybody in the court, and you swear on that. And swearing oaths is something that there's controversy about. And Jesus said you shouldn't swear oaths, really, but I think he was talking about who you swear an oath to. Because your oath should be to a higher power. It should never be to a body, a corporate body.
Yes, indeed.
So
it was basically implying that your God is within you. That's what he was saying. You don't. That's exactly what he was saying. Yeah. That's the only one that is worthy of an oath on your part.
Yes. So when you swear in a court, it's quite a serious thing. And when you go into a court and you see other people blatantly lying, it's like interesting actually, because this is where the real problem is. If you go in a court and the police go into court, well, I've been to 5 court cases where the police attended, and I've seen them lie 5 times. So that's pretty serious, isn't it? And the lawyer in this case that we had to go through, he said to me, don't bring the police into it, Mark. He said, they'll lie. He said, it's almost like they have a bet before they go in to see who can tell the biggest whoppers. And they don't care. They do not care. They will make things up in front of a judge that are absolutely ludicrous. Like, oh yes, well, he had ginger hair, but he's got black hair today. Well, maybe he's changed the color. They just don't even care what they're saying. I've seen this happen. They said, well, what did he look like? And the officer clearly didn't describe the person who was in the court. So this is the problem with the system. It's inherently been corrupted, and it's been corrupted because it's not under God's law. It's not just because it's under man's law. It's because it's under the Crown Temple, the Knights Templar, the Temple Bar, and basically what's happened is it's Freemasonic, and once you get Freemasonry involved. It's not Freemasonry is not as popular as it was, but you're still up against a lot of it, because I've been to several court cases over the last few years, and something's gone on behind the scenes that's not being disclosed. There's an element of something very evil going on, and you can tell it when you go into the court. You can tell it by what happens, and you can tell it by your lack of remedy. However,
you can tell them, Mark, can't you? Just one little thing. You can tell. I mean, the point also is, I found this in education when there was problems. Anyone with a half a brain knows that these things are easy to stop. If you want to stop policemen lying, sort of catch a couple of them and punish them severely, and they won't lie anymore. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. All you need is consequences for the wrong thing. The consequences are not there, though.
No. This is the common good. It means it's not in the public interest for them to know that those people walking around in uniforms are criminals. It's not in the common good, is it? But there are more criminals. Statistically, there's more dishonest people within the police than in the public.
Okay.
And the 9 laws of policing says that the police are the public and the public are the police. We're them and they're us. But what happens now is they've got that uniform on and they're acting as oppressors, you see. And the people should not, but they're wary of the police. Everyone's wary of them because they think, oh God, what are they going to do? You know. Then you shouldn't be thinking that. You should be thinking, oh, do I need their help? I mean, I've had vehicles broken into. I've had loads of stuff stolen. I'd never go to the police. It's a waste of time. So something's wrong there, you see. That's the point, that the system is being run by privateers and administrators. And it's being run for the advantages of certain people. Okay, people say that's normal corruption. But I've seen that normal corruption. Now, what's interesting is that government bodies who do this fraud and steal people's houses through the county court on fake paperwork with their fake bailiff companies, you can get remedy, but you have to know where to go. You have to go to the High Court. You have to go to Queen's Bench. Now, most people don't know about Queen's Bench. It sounds like something in some big building with all these people with wigs in. It's not. It's a room. You know. I mean, this is the thing people don't realise. Queen's Bench can be held anywhere. If there's a judge with you, you can hold it in Starbucks. It doesn't matter.
Is that when you went to that master guy for advice about? We'll tell that story then, Mark. That's quite interesting. That one.
Well, it's quite interesting. Yeah. So okay. So let's go into the administrative courts. What happens is that because we've said that now that we've property is being conveyed in the county court. Okay, property is being conveyed in the county court, and you deregulate the officers of the court, which are bailiffs. Okay, a bailiff is bonded to the court now, but he's not an officer of the court. They work for private companies like Marston's, like Rossendale's, who are now owned by Rothschild Investments. There's JBW Group. These people are all undercutting each other for business. Most of their so-called bailiffs are self-employed businessmen. They're working for money. So it's in their interest to get as much out of you as possible. Now, there's a thing called the Control of Goods Act where I think they can come round 3 times. And there's 2 fees involved. There's one that's £75, it goes up to £224. Then it goes to the 3rd stage. And if they can't enforce it in those 3 stages, then it goes back to the council. They brought that in recently because a lot of these bailiff companies were acting as privateers and land pirates, which is what they are. So basically what happened was this. My relative had not been paying council tax. We were doing some experimentation with it. Now, council tax goes back to the poor laws. It's nothing to do with the 1992 Local Government Finance Act, which was what the Muppets in your local councils say. It goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where you have liabilities to the council because you're born in a parish, and the parish have liability to you. You're registered with them. In actual fact, you're their property. So all this stuff about council tax goes back to the poor laws. Are you a pauper? Can we put you in the workhouse? Well, not anymore. We abolished that in actually it was only in the 1950s, I think. And the Workhouse Act was renewed, I think, in the 1837. We can go into all that later. Not important. But the point is this. What happened was, didn't pay the council tax. Bailiffs weren't getting anywhere with it. The council then decided to give it to a firm of limited liability solicitors. In other words, a debt collection stroke solicitors. So you have one qualified solicitor in there, and it's a debt collection company. Lots of solicitors do this, right?
So they sold the debt. They sold the debt.
Yeah, but it's actually, well, actually, it was still allegedly being on behalf of the council. Now, this is where it gets interesting, okay? So what happens next is you get a firm of solicitors who then go to the county court. This is where you got a problem. Those solicitors know people in the county court who generate the paperwork for them. So they generate the order against you, right? They get a writ. Basically, they get a judgment against you in the county court, and then they enforce it. How do they enforce it? Well, they can ask you for the debt, or they can get their private debt collectors to come round, or they can go for your property. So for £2,000 upwards, if you've got a house, they can go for it, right? So the equity in the house might be £300,000, whatever. Well, this is land piracy now, right? You're getting into real land piracy. So what can happen is that you can go to a county court. You can find yourself in private with a judge that's working with his brethren, because they're all officers of the court. They're nothing to do with you. This is their private business. It's nothing to do with you now, right? You've been summoned to a place that looks like a court. It's a private room in a county court. The staff in there issue their own paperwork to their friends, the bailiff company, and you've got a problem now because you're in their division of land piracy, and you think you're in a court. So what they can do then is they can say, well, I'm upholding this order. You haven't attempted remedy, and therefore I'm going to give these people the right to restitution of your property, and that's it. A bit more complicated than that, but basically that's it, right?
So they're allowed to sell your house?
Yes. So then what happens is you get a load of thugs turning up, usually with the police, with about 5 or 6 police vans, dogs and everything. And this has happened to quite a few people I know. You get your door kicked in, they throw you out, they arrest you if you resist, you get put in the back of a van, they lock you up, and then they get the firm Mighty to shutter the windows up, and then the property rots away. And all your stuff's inside, and you lose everything. And they let the property rot away, and then they get their friends in the auctions, in firms of estate agents. They're all connected, and I know who's doing it. I'm not going to say, but I know who's doing it. And if anyone has got anything to say about this, get in touch with me. But we knew big firm of estate agents, in-house auctioneers, right? This is all private. Remember, this is private now. You're nothing to do with it anymore. So it's gone to a private court. It's going now to a private auctioneer, and it's going to go to a private buyer. And that's how it's done. That's how land piracy happens in this country. And people go, well, how can that happen? Because they don't understand the system. And the system is now 10 times worse than it was 10 years ago. I'll tell you why. Because every public servant in every part of administration is a liar. They've been trained to lie. Anyone in any position of importance has no honor. So the only thing that you can do is get yourself into that high court, to Queen's Bench, go and see a master and try and get it stayed. And the master said to me, and I went in and said, oh, they're trying to take my relative's house for a debt of £2,000, and the house is in trust. He said, well, I should go there if I was you. And I thought, well, that's not very helpful advice. On the way out, he said, there's one thing, but I wouldn't recommend it. I said, what's that? He said, there is some doubt as to whether judicial review runs to the county court. Let me explain that. What he's telling you is that if you do not get this out of the county court into the High Court of Equity and Chancery, they will steal your property. I'm telling you, that's what he was telling me.
And can you get it out of the county court? Is it possible to do that?
Yes, you have to get it. Now, we've also got other problems here, okay? Government agencies like the Child Support Agency were taken down by some friends of mine who set up an organisation called the Deadbeat Dads. It was nothing to do with people not paying for their children. It was about the state stealing assets, okay? Yeah. They found out where all the assets were going and all the rest of it. We don't need to go into all that. But that was the same thing. In other words, you go to the county court, the paperwork's already done, they're going to steal your house. And you have to get it out of there. Now, what some friends of mine did was they brought down this child support agency, pretty much, and it's now another organisation. But they were allowing this to happen. And people
how did they do it, Mark? How do they get it into the High Court?
No, they're not in the High Court. It's all in county. That's what I'm saying.
But how do they manage to do that to turn the situation around? Then it's still not clear to me how that happened.
You have to go to Queen's Bench. You have to go to the Royal Courts of Justice and go to Queen's Bench. Queen's Bench Action Team, room E07, and you have an appointment to see a master. You have to have everything written down on a piece of paper and as to why there's been a controversy and what's gone wrong. So in other words, you say, well, this property has been taken on the back of an assumed debt for £2,000, which hasn't been proved. Okay, we'll put a stay on it. You're then going to tell us why you haven't remedied and paid the £2,000, and we're going to see if these people are being reasonable.
Okay,
they're going to be found out not to be reasonable, right?
Well, does that happen in a court, or does the master do that? Who does that?
Right, it'll get stayed by a master, and you can go and get it heard in Chancery. I've never actually gone beyond. I go to masters, right?
Right.
And I've done that. I've had the remedy with the master for everything I've
Okay.
need to do.
So
But
that's so that is intimidating to the county court then when that happens.
Yes, because because it's based on ignorance. So the point is this: the Admiralty jurisdiction, the county court, all the stuff we've been talking about, you as property and all the rest of it, and all your goods and chattels can be stolen by privateers. Now, if you go above the privateers, you're above the land pirates. You're into the law. Then you see, in the county court, they can say, but we're obeying the letter of the law. There was an order made. It was a lawful order. And it was made in the court. That's all true. That's the letter of the law. But it's not lawful in the spirit of the law.
What's that Halsbury thing, Mark? That Halsbury thing,
yeah.
where the advice was that the whole system is basically illegal, really. The whole system, where these courts take all these powers together, and powers that they shouldn't have. And it was declared by a higher court that this shouldn't be happening, wasn't it?
Yes. That's Halsbury's Laws of England. And Halsbury's Laws of England is something that we've taken into the courts many times. Let me just read this out. Right, Halsbury's Laws states, administrative courts are unlawful. The law is absolutely clear on this subject. There is no authority for administrative courts in this country, and no act can be passed to legitimize them because, oh God, it's jumped now, because of the constitutional restraints placed upon Her Majesty at her coronation. Right, let's take this apart. Interesting point here. At Her Majesty's coronation. That's an interesting one. Because according to the belief system, the Queen has to be crowned on Jacob's pillow, the stone of Scone. The biblical Jacob's pillow, which resides in Westminster Abbey under the throne. 2 days before the Queen was having her coronation, Queen Elizabeth, 1953.
Yeah.
The stone was removed, allegedly by two students.
Oh, it's in Edinburgh now, isn't it?
No, I think they got it back, but they don't know whether it's the real one. I mean, I would have thought that they would have had several of these things because they're symbolic.
Okay.
But the point is, you see, no monarch can be a monarch unless they're crowned on that stone. That's what they believe. Not what we believe, it's what they believe. So within the system, I think the Crown Temple, the City of London, the Templars know this, and that they're the crown. Her crown is not valid because she never had a proper coronation.
This is more black magic now, Mark.
Oh, yes. It's a good case, isn't it? I mean,
what you're saying is that within this tyrannical system, really, this dishonest system, they work very hard at being consistent in what they do, in conforming to their own, their own prerogatives and rules. And that's what you're saying here. But at the same time, if that statement about the administrative courts being unlawful, if that's true, I mean, how come no one's enforced that? How come there's no people can't take that to the court and saying, hey, this was Halsbury's judgment. I challenge your judgment, what you've done to me, because you don't have a right to do it. How come that has never happened? Do you know?
I see no deficiency in the paperwork brought before the court, sir.
So they would just ignore it?
They could do.
I mean, obviously it has been ignored.
I would advise you, sir, to get legal representation for the next court appearance.
Okay. I'll just try and avoid someone nicking my house in the first place. I think that's
yes. Put it into trust.
Yeah. Okay, mate.
Yeah.
It's all very interesting. It really is.
It's very interesting. But it says the collection of revenue by such means is extortion. Halsbury's Laws of England.
Right.
And extortion has been found reprehensible since ancient times. Separation of powers today, and this was in the year 2011, it was written in Halsbury's Laws. We find, for example, that in the council tax regulations, the billing authority, the prosecuting authority, and the enforcement authority are all vested in the same body.
Right, yeah.
The same bodies even purport to issue their own legal documents by tacit agreement with the courts, which they do.
But
in our system of common law, the rule of law demands that we have a separation of powers. Today, the powers are not separated. The executive is not a distinct, freestanding leg of the tripod. The executive now emerges directly from within the elected chamber of the legislature, where previously it emanated directly from the monarch. That goes back to what I've just said, doesn't it?
But given what you just said there, I mean, if I can I'll go to this thing, Mark. This is like related. What's this? You see this diagram here, right?
Yes.
This is the system of world governance as described to the KGB or the FSB by the Russians, and they have a system here that's enforced by the law, that is basically where the authority that is really in charge is outside the system. That thing at the top they call the conceptual power. Now, the conceptual power are obviously very clever people, and they have various organizations above any kind of government. You know, the secret services, the banks, and the secret societies, and so on. Now, what you've just said indicates, because this is all back to front, I'm struggling to line this up. If this system, I think this system describes things as they are because it makes sense to me. But what you're saying is that all these things really that are going on within the law are probably managed from the top. They cannot be accidental. They cannot. It cannot be accidental that you've got a system that is systematically seizing property way in excess of the value of any debt. This is an attack on vulnerable people by the financial powers that own the system. Surely it can be nothing else. And the court people, all these various judges and barristers and bailiffs, and like the police, Mark, I know, I've been a teacher. Most people who are employed are order followers. They do what they're told, and if they get authority from above, they'll just do it. You know, it's the income, and the more efficiently they do it, the higher they go, the more they get paid. It's like it becomes automatic to people to be whatever they are, however dishonest, however wicked. But it is all coming from the top. This is not privately thought out by judges or by barristers or by any of these people. It's a system attacking us. That's what's going on here.
Yes.
Attacking the vulnerable amongst us.
Yes, but we're property, so we're deemed to be property, and we have to prove we're not property. And that's quite difficult to do when you've got a system that is stacked against you like this.
Well, what about the people, Mark? What about the people who don't? I mean, this is another byword, but the travellers don't sign the birth certificate. A lot of those people, right? So that the travelling community don't consent to being this kind of property, do they? Because they don't register their children. They move around, and that gives the system a real problem in dealing with them, doesn't it?
That's why they're coming down. That's why they're coming down harder on them now. So, yeah. It's good. Under these stuff we talk about, like Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, it's a land grab on a much bigger scale than used to be.
So they're turning on the travellers in a way they haven't done in the past now.
Yes, that's going to be a big part of it. And this is an interesting thing.
One detail, Mark. If a traveller is charged with a crime and they're not held because it's not serious enough, is that traveller, if he doesn't turn up for court, has he committed... what's that thing? Contempt.
Well,
because he hasn't promised to be a ward of the court, has he?
Theoretically,
sorry.
Theoretically, it's contempt because ignorance of the law is no excuse. If you're ignorant of the law, that's not a problem.
But he hasn't signed the consent, though, Mark. The consent isn't there. His parents haven't filled in the birth certificate, have they?
No.
So if there's no consent, how can there be an offence? Because the only reason that I would have thought, just in logic, the contempt is because you've promised something and then you've broken your promise. But those people made no promise in the first place, have they?
Well, it's implied if you're on the land. If you're on any place of land, it's implied. But the problem they've got is that if you haven't got a birth certificate, then there's nothing to take into the dock. There's only the property, which is the person, the real living human being, flesh and blood, which they will have to try and find. Now, if you get that in front of a judge and you get the consent with the name, then they can proceed. This is the interesting thing about it. But in a way, I don't think any of this is that important anymore. I'll tell you why. Because the system now does what it wants. So you have to insulate yourself at a higher level than this stuff now. Because all this stuff about, it's quite interesting. Many years ago, and you can still see on YouTube, we made a film called Councils, Courts and Con Men, where a fella who was a bit of a con man in real life actually went into court on somebody's behalf, took their birth certificate into the dock for some council tax that was owed. So the birth certificate was in the dock. The clerk of the court, we put it into the court with the big glass docking and everything. You know, you have to make it look like a court. And this is council tax. So let's look at it this way: the council issued the summons, as it says in Halsbury's. They are the whole body. In other words, there's no separation of power. We find, for example, that in the council tax regulations, the billing authority, the prosecuting authority, and the enforcement authority are all vested in one body. So they create their own paperwork. Now, this opened the door for the county court to do that, right? Because what you're doing is you're watering down the system. Now, the point is that, yes, there are cases where people have gone into court and they don't identify themselves. The court cannot proceed unless you identify yourself with the legal entity that's written down. Now, what's interesting about this is, from a black magic point of view, I know somebody who was summoned to court, but they spelt their name completely wrong. But that doesn't mean that the person didn't turn up. The court just says, "Is that you?" And they could have gone, "No, that's not me." Now, there was a friend of mine who did this, and it was for an alleged assault. I wouldn't recommend anybody do this, by the way, unless you really know what you're doing. And I'm not giving any legal advice tonight. That's very, very important. This is not legal advice. But it went into court, and it's Regina versus whoever, Regina versus John Smith. So John Smith goes into the court and says, "Where's Regina?" And the judge says, "Well, she's not here." He says, "Well, why isn't Regina here?" "Well, she's the Queen, sir." "But the Queen is the witness against me." "What are you going to do then?" "Well, we have several witnesses against you, sir, but it's Regina that summoned me here today, sir. Those people didn't summon me. Regina summons me and she's not here." Very interesting argument. Not one I'd recommend, but one that allegedly worked in one court case, because I think they got so sick of it that they just gave up. But this is a funny thing, because all of these occult things do apply to the court. And when the judge orders you to stand, all rise, that means you're under my jurisdiction. If you stand up, I've given you an order. You accepted my order. That's it. You can sit down now. See what I mean?
You had a thing with that, didn't you? With that standing thing. Yes. You had an incident with that.
Well, what happened was that this court case, it was in Cumbraon in Wales. A fellow friend of mine, Steve, he decided not to pay his council tax. So he got this fellow who's a bit of a con man to go to court. And we all went to court. We turned up in Cumbraon. All the locals were interested. We all went into their court. There's too many of us. They put us in the big court. And I said, and so the clerk says, "Mr. Stephen Barry." I said, "Mr. Stephen Barry is here, sir. Here's Mr. Stephen Barry. The birth certificate is in the court. Birth certificate is now in the dock." I go, "Mr. Stephen Barry." He said, "Mr. Stephen Barry is in the court, sir. He's in the dock." He said, "Mr. Stephen Barry." So basically, he wasn't in the court, right? Yeah. Now, what happened then was that we were still stood up. Okay. So when the magistrates came in, Mr. Stephen Barry hadn't appeared, and we were stood up. So we were sat down. Sorry. So when they came in on the bench, they said, "All rise for the magistrates." The clerk says, "All rise for the magistrates." Magistrates come in. 3 magistrates come in. "All rise. We're sat down." "All rise. I consider this to be contempt of this court, and I'm ordering you to stand up." Sat down. He didn't know what to do. He called the police. Now, what's happened is, because we haven't stood up, the magistrates can't sit down. And this has happened 3 times. And on the 3rd time, under occult law, they have to leave the bench and never come back.
Okay.
Because if you fail to get jurisdiction 3 times, that's it.
Okay.
3 strikes and you're out, basically. So they've stood up. You know, we've sat down. We've never stood up. They've come in. They've never sat down. Because we haven't stood up. So they can't sit down until we've stood up.
What was that? Mark, what was that time when you were leading a case that you thought you were going to win, and the people who came to support you wouldn't stand up, and you told them to stand up?
Yes. So we had a case against Waltham Forest Council, and it was a very interesting case. And I think we should talk about this, Kevin, maybe on another show, because I don't want to get into detail of that case now. But it's a very important case, and it affects hundreds of thousands of people in this country. And I proved in court that you don't have to sign a certain piece of paperwork from the council if you supply the evidence yourself. And that goes to most pieces of paperwork.
Okay, mate. Well, it's an hour now, so maybe that's a good place to...
Yes, but what happened was I was going to win the case. We've got Aylesbury's Law, we've got post-it notes everywhere. The council think that I'm going after them on agency and contract. In other words, you're not allowed to have a contract with a third party. The council not allowed, which they are, of course they are. They thought I was doing some free man thing, so they thought we've got it in the bag. They had a barrister called Rita Chakrabarti came in, and we had all our books, and we had my mate next to me, Peter, we call Mr. Sheen, in the court, and he looks like a barrister because he's got a suit on, and he's putting all the law books down, and he leans over to me and he goes, "Oh, by the way, don't forget the other 5 counts of fraud, will you?" And this barrister's going, "What?" They think it's just some silly free man on the land argument, like, "I've got no contract." And no, it's nothing to do with that, right? It's about the fact that the council are using paperwork that's fraudulent, that purports to be from them, which is not from them. And if you sign it, they're going to fine you. A third-party company is going to fine you, and you can't have predetermined liquidated damages in a civil contract. That sounds complicated, but it means that, say you park on private land, they can't enforce that ticket because there's no contract between you. They haven't made a loss. In other words, if they're a company and it's their property and you park on it, right, then they're a company. You have to invoice them if you've had something off them. They have to invoice you. What they're going to invoice you for? In a parking space that was free. What if they lost? Nothing. There you go. It's called Dunlop versus New Garage. But this is a similar thing, right? Similar thing. But what I'm saying is that, yes, a load of these free men turned up, and the judge he's on our side. We're going to win. The council are already on the back foot. All rise. All rise. And I'm going, "Get up, you bloody idiots. We're winning, you fools." That's where the free man on the land thing really is funny. In other words, why not shoot yourself in the foot and hang yourself at the same time?
Yeah. Okay. You won that case anyway, Mark.
We won the case. It became case law. They took it off the register. They took it off.
Okay.
A lawyer told me, because they can't have that. It's not in the public's interest for them to know there's a remedy. It's not in the public's interest to know that the council are committing fraud on them. It's not in the public's interest for them to know that if you supply evidence yourself backed up with a statutory declaration or an affidavit, you don't have to fill in anything they send you.
Right.
And that's what it's about. That was what the case was about. Yeah.
Fair play anyway. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you, are you doing this again? Are you going to carry on with this law next week or the week after?
Yeah, do you want to do another one next week?
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think I'm away the Wednesday after that, but I mean, you just.
Let's do next week, and let's get into more meat and potatoes and some cases, and also a bit more about how this happened and where it's going. Because I've got I was talking to someone in Australia at the early hours of the morning for about 3 or 4 years, constantly about this stuff. And Frank's not doing it anymore. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Frank's not doing it anymore. And me and him had very long conversations, and I made lots of notes. And some of the stuff that we were finding, it was all about statutes like the Admiralty Law Act, all this sort of stuff, the Birth, Deaths and Registrations Act, which makes you property of the state through the roll on the register, what an estate is, what a trust is, what a claim is, all of this stuff. I was working on it for a long time, and he had expert knowledge, which was rather complicated. I had other people I was talking to who were giving me similar things. I've now got somebody else who phoned me up the other day, who's a very interesting chap, who's got some real good stuff on the occult side of this, which we can bring in as well. So
I'm interested in that.
Yeah,
I'm interested in that.
It's once we go into the Crown Temple and where the power really is, then there is a code of honour in those people. There's a code of honour in the City of London. There's more honour in the City of London than without the City of London, which is a very strange thing, isn't it?
That is actually.
However, there's more inherent corruption within the City of London because there's this thing, the common good.
The question is it honour, Mark, or is it like adherence to an internal system? You know,
there's not adherence to an internal system, but there's also more of a code of honour, I think, because the law comes from there. The law comes from the City of London. The law comes from the Royal Courts of Justice. Now, what happens is you've got a problem because once you've got corporations with Westminster Magistrates Court, which is in the City of London, just about in the city, I think, they are another court where you can have problems because you're talking about the Crown Temple, the bailiff companies, the Freemasons, the people who are working within the system. And remember, you're not in the system. So
I must tell you, Mark, I've been tutoring a lad for a few years, tutoring maths and physics and stuff. And he's just going and doing a law degree now, this young man down in Guildford. And he's saying that public law is like very hard to come to terms with because I actually don't know why, because I don't know what you study when you study public law. But I mean, when you talk about it like this, it does seem to be just a miasma of internal contradictions, anomalies, deliberate kind of fraud, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it must be very hard for a student to have a clear idea of what's going on with public law. It must be very hard.
Well, it's all about the three things. There's the law, there's legal, and there's what's termed the common good for everybody. The common good for everybody doesn't mean that you have any rights. And the new system of communitarianism within law, which is actually being written into law, it's basically mob rule. There's no individual rights anymore. It has to be for the common good. For instance, the information that I put out to the public is not in the common good because it could destabilize society. People could get ideas, couldn't they?
But how is this written into the system, though?
It's written into the system by assumption. What's the common good? What is it? What's in the public interest? Is it in the public's interest for them to know that they have remedies which, if they started to enforce, could become a problem? This was what happened in the Middle Ages under the heresy laws. They said we cannot let people have this access to knowledge. It cannot happen.
What you're saying is the common good means what's good for the system.
Yes.
Itself. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything else.
And you're part of the system. So ultimately, it's for your good. Now,
we know it isn't for my good, but I mean.
Yeah, I know, but I'm talking about it from their point of view. So
I get it. Yeah.
That's the issue. It's not what's right for you. It's what's right for the system and what you are in the system. Now, I know for a fact that a friend of mine was found guilty and completely stitched up because for some reason, those people high up within the system in the City of London think it's a good idea. Now, that's a bit of a worrying and sinister aspect to things because they know about me. They know what I do. And I thought that there was remedy within there. And I think there is remedy in there. But I think that what they might be doing is they want to teach you a bit of a lesson. And I don't think that you can be too overt about this stuff. We're just talking generally tonight, but I work with groups of people and groups of people work all over the country behind the scenes, and you'll never hear about them because once the state knows what they're doing, they could be in trouble.
Well, I think the state lets us do what we like as long as we don't organize against them in a serious way. I mean, we know Keith Motherson. He was the same as us, an activist, but more politically active he was organizing, wasn't he? He was organizing groups, significant groups, like he was going to mosques in Birmingham and about issues we know about. And obviously, he was seen to be a threat. and we know what happened to him. He was dealt with, So this is it's not in the it's obviously not in the system's interest to deal with people like us, and they won't unless we go too far. But at the same time, the thing that's happening that is good for everybody is and that millions of people literally are doing is they're spreading the information that people need to know about how the system works. And that's in a way that's something that although the YouTube and all these things have got all these, and Google have got all these search now protocols to stop the information spreading. It is spreading, Mark. It just is. That can't really be contained very well. So
what happens then?
We're in an interesting place now.
Yeah, we're in an interesting place. However, the misinformation is vast because the state does not want this stuff out there. So they're going to divide and rule every single group out there. They're going to undermine anybody. Anybody who's any good will be undermined.
Yeah.
So in other words, the people who get promoted and the people who think you've got the remedy and the ones who are telling you, shouting from the rooftops, I know how to get your birth bond back. I know how you can get away with not paying your mortgage. They love them.
Ignore them, yeah.
Well, no, but the state loves them because they're helping. They're helping to break us down.
They're working for them.
Yeah. Well, inadvertently. Some maybe just working for them, but I know that they tried to control all this stuff. I was in all this free man stuff years ago. There were so many infiltrators, and it was a load of rubbish anyway. It never worked. There's certain concepts within it that work, but you've got to be a bit more sophisticated than that. This is base level entry stuff. I'm not a legal fiction. Well, clearly you're not a legal fiction because you're talking to me, but the legal fiction's on paper, and that's where you've got to talk to the court. Okay? If you don't want to talk to the court, then we'll administer it without you. You don't need you here. Get out. We'll just send you the order when we've done with you.
Okay, mate.
You've got one choice, really, no choice. but there are loads of remedies. I mean, I've won loads of court cases. It's just that when you come up against this very serious side of it, then see, the thing is that you have to be flexible. And this is a final point. When the World Bank decided to bring in this thing called sustainable development, which is just a way of gaining everything on the planet and the control and infrastructure of everything that affects the livelihood of people, and basically the control of people and the control of all assets under an environmental program, which we can't go into now, called the Agenda 2030, which we talk about quite a lot, UN, because the UN's above this. Remember, the UN is part of this thing.
Yeah.
Remember that the UN human rights. UN human rights actually takes your human rights away because it lowers your rights. You'd lose your inalienable rights, or as they say in America, unalienable. Inalienable rights are rights that cannot be leaned. They can never be taken away. But you have to enforce those rights. Now, what we're talking about now is enforcement of ideology through law, which is what this is all about. This new system of communitarianism is that there's one choice, no choice. You adhere to what we're saying. Yep. And if you don't, that's not in the common good. We're not having you coming in here with your fancy ideas thinking that you can make money outside of our system. We're not having it. So we're going to take you down, and that's what they'll do. So everything has to be done in private, a bit like what we said earlier on. So
one thing though, Mark, is that the whole thing is accelerating in some way. On the news, even this evening, you've now got an anti-Greta Thunberg character over in Germany, who's a climate denialist, and it's on the BBC. So obviously there's some problems here for this agenda. I mean, there are a lot of people. It's not going very smoothly, and because it's not going smoothly, it seems to me that other things are being raced through very quickly. I'm not sure. I'm making very broad statements here, but it's
okay. It's ramping up very quickly. The property grabs are on the increase. Old people are losing their estates every week for care. We talked about that last week. Every public servant pretty much is dishonest. Everyone who works in any major institution is dishonest, or they wouldn't be there. That's the problem. So everything's been broken down. So
that's very encouraging to all you young students out there.
Well, the point is this, right? That there are ways to win. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm only interested in solutions. I'm not interested in virtue signaling or just or getting on here every week and just being here as some kind of media personality or show. That never interested me. That's why I didn't go into it. I'm only interested in stuff that is concentrated, that'll work, and that has power to it. And we found that over the weekend. I mean, we were banned from this venue. It's a Quakers venue. And then I looked at the Quakers and I thought, oh, so you're working for the Antichrist now, are you? Clearly. Because what they're doing is indoctrinating children, brainwashing them into accepting slavery for the rest of their lives. And they've got basically an endowment fund for climate, which is what the World Bank endorses, right? So they're basically, the Quakers are now doing the bidding of the World Bank, and they're forcing children into this ideology. Well, that's satanic, isn't it? So I told them that you're basically my article, which you can see on Windows on the World. It's basically all about that, and it's a little microcosm of what we've been talking about tonight in a way, because it goes into all these areas and it shows you that, okay, so you've got the antithesis of Greta Thunberg. We've got an antithesis, other cards, there can't be a synthesis, can there? Yeah, so what's going to happen at some point is they're going to say, well, she's anyone who follows this one's far right, and anyone who follows Greta is working in the common interest. You see, because you can't have these far right white people coming in and telling you that climate change doesn't exist, which is such a childish thing to say anyway. Of course, I mean the climate changes every day, but the point is that we were shut down by about one or two people. Communitarianism about common interest, okay? We had 60 people in that room, but it's not in the public interest for us to have their venue, because they are enforcing one choice, no choice. So that's what I'm saying. We got a pub and we had 60 people in there, but they've tried everywhere to shut us down. These New Age centres, the Hamblin Trust, and all of these people, they're disingenuous liars, and they're only working for the interests of the state because they've got their fat noses on the trough and glued to seats, right? And they're all at it, basically. So if you're not at it, then you don't get the benefits of the state. So you have to have your nose in the trough, don't you? If you haven't got your nose in the trough, what's the matter with you? You know, this is the point. And this is the way that the public have been taught to think, to have no morals, no integrity, and no honour. Well, that doesn't mean that everyone's like that, does it?
Maybe the solution is, Mark, that we all go on training courses and learn to be exorcists. What about that?
Well, that's bloody hard work, that. I've tried to get rid of demons from people, and it can be quite exhausting, you know.
Okay. That's another show. Yeah. Okay, mate. Yeah.
Well, that's great, Kevin. I think we should leave it there. We've got 173 people listening. That's great. Lots of people are going to see it afterwards. We're here every 8 p.m. 8 p.m. We're going to be back next week, me and Kevin, talking about this stuff. If you're interested, tune in. Get your friends to listen, because we are imparting some very important information here, which has taken a long time to put together. Now, do support us on Patreon. We're on Patreon. You can support Windows on the World on there. Become a patron. Get access to our movie that we're making, or documentary. The Heretics of Smithfield, all about people burnt at the stake in the Middle Ages. And also you get access to stuff that's not on Windows on the World there. So if you want to help us, please do. If you want to book us for a talk, book me, myself, Piers, and Sandy, or myself on my own. I can come and talk about this stuff all night long. I can talk about Agenda 21. I would talk the Real Citizens Assembly, which the Quakers said was political. Well, it's not actually. It's just the name of it. And they said that we were an organisation. No, it's just me. It's only my website. So that's lie number 2. They did about 4 lies in a row, called them out on that. So, yeah, if you want to book us, please do it through the website. And I'm going to be back here next week talking to Kevin. And have you got anything you want to say, Kevin? Have you got any articles that you want to direct people to, anything like that?
Not particularly. I put a couple of things up on the Truth Seeker this week. Did a bit of a reflection on what circumcision is, actually. That's another quite big issue. We might talk about that sometime. But not really, Mark. You know, it's this stuff, it'll keep going on and on, really. You know, it's but anyway.
However, that's great. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, mate.
All right then, Kevin. I'll see you next week. And if you're in town, give us a call.
I will do.
All right.
Okay, mate.
Thanks everyone for listening. It's great to know you're out there. 8 p.m. every Wednesday on YouTube, but also on windowsontheworld.net. I embed it on windowsontheworld.net, so you can watch it on the website and have a look through some other stuff on the website while you're listening. Makes it more convenient. But Thanks for listening, everybody. See you Sunday, 9 p.m. windowsontheworld.net, and of course here every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Cheers then. Bye.